Syriac, Sendashonga, the IUCN Policy and Program Group. What are you doing on stage?
Good question. Particularly after such a brilliant intervention by Her Majesty Queen Noor of Jordan, who mentioned the organization which I'm privileged to work for, IUCN, which indeed has an office in Jordan which covers West Asia and does a lot of work with her communities and the region. So to answer your question now, I am here because I think this forum is a very, very important event. And coming from where I come from, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, it's clear that agriculture and nature, they are natural allies. Sometimes people think they are enemies, but we've got to make sure they remain friends, because there's no way one will survive without the other. And we need to find solutions to make the two compatible.
So it's good to have you. Good morning, Lawrence Haddad, the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, also known as GAIN. What makes you so important this morning that you're sitting in that cream chair?
I don't know if I'm important, but the things I bring to the table, I think, are a focus on nutrition and health, the human health, a focus on businesses. How do we get businesses and governments working together to really advance nutrition, and to bring a food systems perspective, going beyond agriculture, right from farm to fork.
Alexandra Brand is a Chief Sustainability Officer for Syngenta. Alexandra, is this a brand new role that you're filling?
Yes, it's indeed a brand new role. I'm representing here today the private sector, and I want to bring in all the experience we've been making with thousands and thousands of farmers over the past year on how a more sustainable agriculture can look like. So we go beyond an individual farm and we stay below a policy level, but it's very rich experience, what we want to share, which we've been developing together with partners and a lot of farmers, which I think has to have a place here on stage today.
So we have Alexandra, we have Lawrence, we have Siri, and they are going to be the discussants plus you in a conversation that is going to be started by Hilal Alva. Hilal Alva, good morning. Do come to the podium. She's the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food from the United Nations.
Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. It's a big opportunity for me to be together with you and giving my perspective to the future of the world, future of the agriculture, environment, and human. I have some PowerPoint presentation. Generally, I don't do PowerPoint, so if I make a mistakes, I'm sorry about that. As a UN Special Rapporteur, of course, I will make the put people first. And previous two distinguished speakers made a very important comment about the people's livelihood. And I'll try not to repeat it, but undoubtedly some of the issues that you already heard on that. What are we doing in general as of today, 2017? It's a little bit of sad story, because instead of we are reducing the hunger in global level, the hunger is increasing, which is, these are all new reports from FAO and relevant organizations. What is happening in the world in a level of global hunger, which is now, as of 2017, 815 million people are food insecure, which is 11% more than 2015. So this global food crisis 2018, just 2 days ago, came as a report which According to this report, 124 million in 52 countries experience high-level food insecurity. It is a serious issue. If you look at the global picture, 52 out of 119 countries are having serious kind of food insecurity from low level to the high level. So the highest level of the food security is about famine. Unfortunately, famine came back again, which is kind of sad story again, which I said, since World War II, we never had 4 different countries in the same time under the imminent danger of the famine that announced by the United Nations, basically Northeast in Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, now Myanmar and Democratic Republic of Congo is coming to this group. Last year it was 20 million, this year 30 million people we are talking about. If you look at the world map, you see the global south is suffering from variety of the food insecurity, depending on where they are. As you see, Latin American countries are doing way better than the South Asians and the Sub-Saharan Africans in a very different level of the situation. So why hunger is increasing? This FAO asking this question in its 2017 report. As we all know, conflict is the most important reason, then the climate change and extreme weather events, and then economic slowdowns and impacts on social protection policies. So I also put a little bit more, enlarging this list of the FAO, because failure of the poverty elimination policies and the failure of the rural development policies are major problem. And also, we sort of ignore the hunger and malnutrition in affluent societies as an FAO, because it is not serious, according to them, because only 5% of the food insecure people live in the developed countries. But we have to look at them also. If you consider the United States, 49 million people for food insecure, and UK, 5 million people also insecure. So we have to look at the homelessness of the problem, charity mentality, why we cannot handle even the developed countries. So if you look at, this is the United States, wealth and hunger are increasing. How possible? Wealth is increasing, hunger are increasing, which means the gap is getting bigger and bigger. And again, if you look back again, the conflict situation, 500 million people, it's a huge amount of people currently affected from the protracted crisis, which means on and off are in conflict, not sometimes altogether conflict, but they go back and forth, and the violence. But basically, these countries are in Sub-Saharan Africa. So in the region, Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa is a very problematic area because of war and climate change are together. What we call this vicious cycle. Sometimes climate starts first, extreme weather events starts first, then the war comes, or war comes and then climate comes later. It's a very difficult part of the world to deal with it. So what we can ask this question, why this hunger is increasing, why we have the famine is coming, do we have enough food? All you know, we have more than enough food. So thanks to technology and all other things, production is going very high. As you see, wheat, rice, all the major staple foods are right now increasing. So despite all this production increase, we have serious problems in developed countries and developing countries. Of course, mostly developing countries get the worst situation. As you see, extreme weather events last 2-3 years was very important. Drought, flood, and mudslides around the world, from the United States to sub-Saharan Africa to South Asia. But the resilience of these people are very, very different. So if you look at the extreme weather event, the natural disaster, mostly climate related, and the 80% of this. So obviously we have to do something with the climate change. So what happened is drought, flood, and war bring a migration to Europe, as you know, one of Europe's major problems. So people are leaving their homes, unfortunately, comes here to get a job, to deal with their family. So historically, 65.3 million, but this is 2016. I'm sure right now there will be a new report. It will be 70 million people are worldwide running out of their country, running internally displaced, and also other war reasons. We only 3.2 million asylum seekers we legally sort of defend them, rather than refugees and the internally displaced people according to international law. So we talk about the sustainable development. Are we really doing okay, sustainable development? Are we really eliminating hunger and malnutrition in 2030? I doubt it, because the way in which we are dealing with the sustainable development goals and the general state of the world, these targets are too ambitious. So malnutrition is some kind of hidden hunger for many, many countries. I'm sure our discussions will deal with this issue, but this is extremely important because 2 billion people suffer from undernutrition and micronutrient deficiency, which means hunger sometimes is okay. They eliminate the hunger, but malnutrition is not going to be easily eliminated from the world. So we see also the triple burden of the malnutrition, which means not only undernutrition, not only micronutrient deficiency, but also obesity. You know, obesity is a serious kind of issue in developed countries and also developing countries. United States is the 40%, again, the very new report, make it clear that 40% of the United States citizens is either overweight or obese. That's a serious kind of issue. And this also, of course, they are exporting to in other parts of the world. So let's go right now to the solution. What would be the solution for these problems? First of all, as a right to food special rapporteur, I like to mention this human rights approach is an important part of the food security policies. We should look at really from the perspective human rights approach. And then we have to change the production methods, we have to change the consumption methods, and democratization of the food system. What does that mean, right to food? Right to food basically participation into decision-making mechanism, and the decision makers will be transparent, and we are able to monitor the decisions, and we should make the accountability of our government. So mostly the people, as a people, we have to question our governments, how they make it. The gender equality already, Queen Majesty clearly explained this. It's extremely important part of the human rights because we are going the sort of feminization of the agriculture. Many of the men leave their home and left behind women and children, and women should really make this farming on their own, despite access to resources is a huge problem. So Why we should do, then we have to look at the way in which we do the production system. Why production system is not good? Because we have enough production, but the production system really affects our environment, and still we cannot handle the hunger and malnutrition. So agroecology is a kind of alternative to the industrial agriculture. When I go to the countries in different parts of the world, especially in Africa, I see very good projects that they really make the agroecology is workable system. It's a kind of science, but only not the clear science, but also local knowledge, changing the farming system, and the social movement. Social movement means we have to change our mind about agriculture. From the production, we have to go a little bit more demand rather than supply-oriented ideas. We have to look at the demand-oriented agriculture. As you see, every speakers, I'm sure they will talk about the industrial agriculture. It's a major problem of climate change, environment, and biological diversity, but there's an alternative. We can really change our state of mind. So, and also agroecology was presented by many parts of the world, and we recently see the climate-smart agriculture. Climate-smart agriculture, not well known yet. They have good kind of arguments, but implementation is not clear. So many times they ask, what is the difference between agroecology and climate-smart agriculture? We should actually discuss a little bit more the difference between the two. I'm not going to detail right now because I have very little time. So we're also changing the consumption methods, which means we have to change the consumers. Consumers are extremely important as much as producers, because producers can do the things based on the demand of consumers. As of today, we have a serious kind of a food waste problem from the developing countries to the developed countries. 1/3 of the food goes to the drain. In developing countries, in the farm level, in the developed countries, in the home level. So, but both have a problem. So we try, when we become middle classes getting bigger, we eat more food, more meat-oriented food, meat-based food. Meat-based food is a very seriously problematic in relation to climate change, the biological diversity. So how we should do, we should little bit of go to the less meat, more plant. I'm not saying we stop eating meat because it's a very important protein, especially in developing countries, but we can make some kind of adjustment. So my last point is democratization of the food systems. Seems to be no-brainer. Of course, in democratic societies, food system must be also the democratic. But actually, it is not like that. So, but many in European countries and the United States, we see this democratization of food systems is becoming an important subject matter. So we talk about the food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is a concept that sometimes makes people think and worried about. But the food sovereignty means you have to make your own decision how to produce the food, how to consume the food, and how to handle in the local level. So farmers to consumers, farmers to farmer, kind of community-supported agriculture especially is very important in the climate change and environmental problems. And also now from rural development, we go to the urban, and urban agriculture must be the part of this kind of democratization. So we generally see food policy councils in developed countries. So they grow, and they buy and they eat locally and together. There's a connection between farmers and the buyers. They know what they do. They know what they are buying. But for this, we need a very important conscious decision. We need a knowledge, education, and information. So what is happening in developing countries, maybe they didn't come to that level. So we really have to encourage also developing countries that they are pushing their own system, or maybe they should not change their system. They shouldn't be like developed countries. They shouldn't be really focused on the supermarkets and the long shelf junk food. So we have a lot of work to do to make the developing countries right decision rather than wrong decision. Because this is the farmers' organization, land is the most important asset in our hand. The land protection is as important in developing countries and the developed countries. In the developed countries, we are seeing aging of farming, and we are seeing the farm prices are going very high. In developing countries, most of the farmers don't have a property rights. So because they don't have a property rights, the government is very open to foreign investment, and then people have no security to be in their farm or to be in their land. So we need a global and a national event, a national regulation to make the farmers comfortable, happy, and not constantly talking about what will happen in the future. I think my time is over. How long I went beyond my...
Hilal, come and sit down.
Okay, good. Thank you.
It's a Hilal, come and sit down overrun.
Okay.
Nice job. Beautifully done. You don't have to do all at the podium. Come and do it here with us. It is possible that you have better questions than I have. Entirely possible. Hashtag FFA2018. And then also, in about 10 or 15 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce you to the hostesses. They have microphones. And then again, your questions can be up here as well. We can have this open dialogue that FFA is very well known for. Hilal, can you read a room? Can you read if what you're saying is making sense to people?
I think so, because it is an important audience for me to talk with the European farmers and the decision makers. Some of the issues are not part of the Europe, but the Europe is very connection with the world. If we don't deal with what is happening in our global environment, it's very difficult to make a decision here. So that's my point. What is going on in the world and what we should know at the heart of the European Union.
So, Lawrence, if Hilal wasn't sitting right there, what would you say about her presentation?
That was terrible. No, it was great. I really liked the two aspects that really caught my eye were the democratization issue and the demand issue. Because most of the businesses I talk to in the food system say, if only consumer demand were orientated towards nutritious and healthy products, we produce them. Well, I kind of call them out on this because I say, well, you guys in the business, you also shape demand. You don't just meet demand, you shape it. But I'm sympathetic because businesses will only generate demand for their products. They won't generate demand for healthy foods as a set of foods. So governments really need to do a better job, but they can engage businesses in doing that. Not food businesses necessarily, but businesses whose job it is to create compelling, sticky messages that really connect at an emotional level. And so much of this is about connecting at an emotional level. Public sector's not very good at telling you and advising you what to eat. You should eat this because it's healthy and it's got lots of fiber and it's good for you. Well, most people don't buy food for those reasons. They buy it because it's delicious and it's aspirational and they want more of it. So that was one thing, and the democratization really spoke to me as well, because we want food systems to bend towards health and sustainability, but to get that to happen, we have to generate movement from below. We have to make it, we know what to do in food systems to do that. The policies are all there, they're proven, the technologies are there, but governments and others have to be made uncomfortable to create the incentives for businesses and others to bend the food system in that direction. And the only way to make them uncomfortable is to somehow get some kind of social movement which involves people who are malnourished as well as others to come together and say, hey guys, pay attention, this is important, and we're not going to vote you in unless you do this.
Siri, I see you thinking.
Yeah.
Share.
And you want to know what I'm thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's on topic.
Yes, it is. I very much liked her presentation. I could see a number of similarities with also the messages I think I wanted to share with the audience with this forum. Basically 4 + 1. The first one being, I think it was clear from her presentation as well as the keynote speech we heard from Her Majesty Queen Noor, that agriculture needs healthy nature to strive. That's obvious to all of us. Secondly, if we want to take that healthy agriculture for healthy future, obviously we've got to look at agriculture from its multifunctional dimension, more or less the same vision as the one in the 2030, the SDGs agenda, which she also highlighted, in that you need to have that social dimension, the economic dimension, and the environmental dimension. Obviously, from where I come from, I tend to think more about the environment. Doesn't mean we don't care about the social or the economic, but just we all come from different perspectives. But we think that agriculture, which comes at such a high cost to the environment, obviously cannot be sustainable. And the third message is, as I said, the one related to the SDGs agenda. She touched on it on several occasions, which we think is the framework within which we have to find the solutions. It has the beauty of being a universal agenda. It's not for the developing countries, it's for everybody. Because even in the developed countries, as she very well illustrated, there are problems of sustainability, of, okay, there may be not hunger, but there is unhealthy eating. So I think that framework allows us to really have a context in which to carry the discussions about the connection between agriculture with health, with a healthy environment, with jobs, with equity, gender dimension, education, etc. And the fourth message, which she also pretty much illustrated in her presentation, is that some of the solutions, they are already there from nature. In IUCN, we have an approach we call nature-based solutions, which is really nature has some wonderful solutions that can contribute to alleviate some of the problems. She mentioned agroecology, conservation agriculture, sustainable land management, and I'm sure many speakers throughout the day will touch on it, basically to show that that biodiversity component, it's critical for agriculture to continue to strive, to be agriculture fitted for the future, taking into account the various challenges we have, one of which obviously climate change. So if we undermine the resource, from the soil, from the life on land, etc., we are lessening the options that we have for the future to adapt to a changing environment. Of course, also notwithstanding the contribution that unsustainable agricultural practices are also making worse the climate change problem. And the fifth message.
I like the way you sneakily said, I've got 4 messages plus one. As if I wouldn't notice that you had 5.
Yes. So the fifth one, and she also touched on it, is...
Slide into the 5th one.
We are here in Europe, and she very well mentioned the role of Europe on the global agenda in terms of the impact that Europe can have on the global food systems. Europe is a producer of food. Europe is an exporter of food. Europe is an importer of food. Europe has a very sophisticated population which, can make informed choices. And I think Europe has a unique responsibility and opportunity to really get its agricultural agenda right. of course, first and foremost for the European farmers and citizens, but also because of the global footprint of this continent on the rest of the world. We cannot do things in isolation. We are all interconnected, so that was my fifth message. I wanted to use this opportunity to say, Europe, you have no excuse not to get these things right. Thank you.
There was a moment where Alexandra nodded. Do you remember that moment when Sue was saying, and you were, yes?
Absolutely.
What was that yes moment? Tell us.
I heard this morning from Queen Noor and also from you, Hilal, a real call to arms that we need to act now. And I heard it on two dimensions. One is a very local dimension. How do we produce food locally? Our global systems with trade is challenged. And when we want people to be nutritiously fed locally, we need to enable local farmers. And we've been a lot working in Africa and looking, how do things really fit together? How can we help farmers to be successful year over year over year? What is what they actually need, in which markets they sell, which seeds they need, what is their environment in which they act? And when you try to open up and get into partnerships, you can really join up things. So I do agree that everything is there today already to make us move in smallholder markets, in family markets, where farmers, she or he, really want to make a difference and want to have a life for their family and want to sustain farming over years. But I also heard a global call to arms on climate change. When we go out and work with farmers, we see climate change happening every day. Climate change is real. And we know already today in the farming systems we have, we can make a huge difference. And there's no contradiction between good soil management, which is of full benefit to the farmer, and with that, making an impact on reducing carbon emissions. This is already possible today. We don't need to wait for policymakers to do something. We can already move today when we collaborate, when we have good dialogue. And this is what FFA is for me about. Find these partnerships and move and really get something done.
So panel, if Alexandra is saying everything is here already, then why isn't more momentum happening? Hello?
Well,
yeah.
I see two reasoning on that. The one is in the developing countries, the governments are very much preoccupied with the development and growth. So because of this, they are making wrong decisions about how to produce food, agricultural production is important.
Give us a wrong decision.
Wrong decisions. For instance, opening up the lands in the monoculture industrial investment, I think it's extremely wrong decision in the developing countries. In developed countries, more production or the big-time agricultural businesses are much more, of course, profit-oriented. We cannot deny industrial agriculture, all the corporations are should not be profit-oriented. But the global economy in one hand and the developing countries' growth on the other, that will be a very difficult uphill road to change the mentality of the way in which we produce food. So we have to change the mentality. We can still make profit and we can still grow, but not extraordinarily, and the people still be happy in their own land rather than going other places.
It's something I really agree. From my own experience, I think we are wasting a lot of energy with being suspicious about each other and about each other's intention. We spend a lot of energy rather disagreeing than looking for what could be a common ground. It's not say that we agree to each and everybody's position, but when we look for what is the common ground, we really can get things moving. And this is, I think, where we should invest more energy. And with that, we are also driving changes to points where we today don't agree on whether it's a solution which has a place in this world or not. And I really want to foster a dialogue. How can we really get moving together rather than, spending energy on disagreeing?
From a nutrition and health perspective, I think there are two things going on that I'm worried about. One is in the low and middle income countries, a lot of policy people just don't get the problem of obesity, diabetes, hypertension. They don't get it because in many places they've emerged from hunger and they're basically saying, give us a break. We're beginning to deal with hunger, and now you guys are telling us we've got to watch the quality of the diet because that's generating a heavy burden of chronic disease. And so I think there's an issue about working with policy people. But in the high-income countries, there's also, I don't think there's an internalization yet of what the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, mean for high-income countries. The MDGs, which were their predecessors, were very much, we in the high-income countries have all the solutions, and you in the lower middle-income countries have all the problems. The SDGs say no one has a monopoly on problems, we've all got them, and no one has a monopoly on solutions. We can all generate them. But I think the high-income countries still think that if they're generous, overseas development assistance, their aid budgets, are doing a good job, then it doesn't really matter what their ministries of agriculture, their ministries of environment, the ministries of trade, the ministries of manufacturing, ministries of energy, it doesn't really matter what they're doing, but it does. It matters for the rest of the world as well as for Europe. So we really need a whole of government approach in the high-income countries to sustainable development.
Are you seeing any governments who are engaging and saying, okay, we're embracing the SDGs. We may still be the developed world, but we get it. We get that it takes a village. The answer can be no.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think there is hope. He's right. I very much agree with what my fellow panelists have said. We've got to remember the SDG agenda has been there just for a couple of years. And it's really a major shift from the way we are used to do things in silos. All of a sudden, all of us are being asked, think integrated. And it's not easy. We still have ministries in charge of agriculture, and the minister, his preoccupation is to make sure that indeed there is agricultural output to feed the country. Ministry of Water Development, maybe it's about irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think every country is now trying to really internalize that SDG agenda because it's integrated. And the moment the ministry in charge of agriculture looking at SDG 2, we'll look at all the targets, not just the one about output, Begin to...
Pop quiz. Yeah. Lights up, please, in the auditorium. Yeah. Lights up. SDG number 2. Oh, food security.
Yes.
Zero hunger. Thank you from the front rows.
Thank you.
Back row, put the lights down.
Yeah.
All right.
Right. So I was saying, 2 years on, it's not a long time, but at the same time, it's true, we don't have much time to waste. So there is a sense of urgency. When you attend some of these, yearly events about the review of the implementation of the SDGs, some countries come and they share experiences on how they are progressing. There are a few who I think are beginning to sort of put in place the institutional setup to be able to really accomplish that agenda. But yeah, the pace is rather slow compared to what we need in order to get there by 2030. So
I know you've got some great ideas. I need to share them with the audience right now, so let's get to those ideas. Lawrence, you've been sitting there serenely, but what you have to suggest to this audience is nothing serene. It's major disruption. Go for it.
Well, I don't know if it's major disruption, but I think there is a sense of, I don't think we've actually I don't think we've tapped into the outrage enough. It is kind of outrageous. I mean, Hilal talked about the 815 million people that are hungry, go to bed hungry every night, and that number is inching upwards, which is shocking. But there are another 2 billion people who don't have enough vitamins and minerals in their bodies, so their brains can't develop properly. There are another 1 billion people who are overweight, I think 600 million, 2 billion people who are overweight, 600 million of those are obese. So when you put all of that together, it's between 1 in 2 and 1 in 3 people in this world are malnourished. So we have a food system. You could put that on its head and say, well, that's pretty good. Food system's generating enough nutrition for 2 out of 3 people. Let's put aside the environmental issues, which of course we can't. That's doing a pretty good job. But I would say that's outrageous. It's not. And we're not channeling it. And why aren't we channeling it? It's because we've got all these little tribes. We've got the people who care about resource use, people who care about climate, people who care about health and nutrition, people who care about obesity. All of those people need to come together and generate a voice that's much, much louder. So I don't think we're channeling the outrage enough. And how do we do that? I think constructively, there's a question here about cities and councils. I think cities are going to be the leaders.
Lawrence, hold tight a minute.
Sorry, all right.
It is a conversation with online as well.
Right.
Do you want to read out the question?
Sure.
It says,
there's a question from the live stream. Do we also need food policy councils on local city levels in Europe? And I think my answer is yes. The energy is going to come from the cities, it seems to me. It's a shame it's coming from the cities when most of the problems are in the rural areas, but the cities will drive the overall agenda because, why? Because mayors want people to settle in their cities. They want them there because they generate jobs and taxes. And to get them there, they have to pay attention to the food environment. It has to be somewhat healthy. And city leaders have a sphere of control. They can actually do something that many national and subnational leaders can't. So I do believe cities are going to be a generator of a lot of change. But I also believe that people who are affected by malnutrition, 1 in 3 people in the world, at a conservative estimate, have to be mobilized. The HIV movement did this brilliantly, with people who are HIV positive became agents of change, never about us, without us. And that mentality is not yet at the heart of what we do in the sustainable development area in the food system. It needs to happen. Adolescence is a really good part, a really good place to start. We're doing lots of work with adolescent movements in Bangladesh, and they are dynamic, and they are powerful, and they're not going to take no for an answer. And they're asking fundamental questions. If any of you have ever given a talk to a school of class kids, school kids, it's terrifying. I do it on a regular basis. It's terrifying because they ask the most fundamental, basic questions that we have all kind of socialized away. But they're the real core questions. So I'm getting passionate. I will turn this back to you,
You're bringing
Femi.
the passion you're saying you're not seeing. Give us a fundamental question that you would hear from a teen, that a teen might actually ask right now.
Why is so much agricultural research and development focused on the 4 major cereals? And so little of it is focused on increasing the productivity of fruits, vegetables, pulses, and some eggs and dairy. Yes. The prices of those foods are, in low-income countries, are 10 times the price of the cheapest staple per calorie, right? A calorie from this food versus a calorie from staples, 10 times. It takes an average family in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan 50% of their income to buy 5 fruits and vegetables a day. That is outrageous. So my dream is to get Elon Musk in the room and say, forget about all this moon stuff. Here's your moonshot. How do you get the price of fruits and vegetables and pulses? 10-fold reduction. Then we're talking.
So if you go to Africa, of course, it's 70% of people's budget goes to the food. And if you buy here, let's say $1 a piece of bread, they pay $3, $4 on that. Same thing, the water is more expensive in these countries than we are in Europe or United States. For instance, in the United States, low-income people, what are they doing? $1, they can go to McDonald's, they get 1 hamburger for their children, and $1 they get only one apple. What do you think? They're going to get the apple or hamburger? Of course they go to hamburger because first, children like the hamburger. Second, protein is very important for the children. So there is a significant policy between malnutrition, food system, and the eliminating of poverty. Without eliminating poverty, we are not going to go anywhere, either developing countries or countries like Europe and US.
This is interesting. On Twitter, nobody seems to be talking about the fundamental effects of cheap food policy. Nobody is paying the true environmental cost of food. Will we need political intervention to sort it out? Thank you, Thomas Bradshaw, farmer on Twitter.
You know, it's a bit the opposite what we've been discussing here. This is a question about, are we having too cheap food? And the panel just said, well, actually, no. Maybe the wrong food is cheap and the wrong food is expensive. So this panel has been discussing, can we really change this equation from making nutritious food more attractive, also financially attractive to people, whereas the basic staple food, making that more difficult accessible. So it's I think a question depends on where are we going, in which geography are we acting, what is the culture of food? Food is something very emotional, very political, and I'm always trying to not come with a simple answer because it's not simple. I'm actually looking for, when we've heard the complaints about policymakers here, how they get it wrong. Why do they get it wrong? I think they have a deep insecurity about what is right or wrong. Where is the transparency on all the data, all the science which have been done? Is that in a common place? Is that in a place where people can take a look at it at a global scale when we look at climate change, or at a local scale when we say which food system is the right system for my environment and my population? And there is no common place where people can go and say, this is actually the science and the data I want to look at. For climate change, we have made it with IPCC. There is one global accepted science which shows what is evidence. What does it mean when you want to shape climate policy? We don't have that today for food. We don't have that today in agriculture. And I think that's something which we're really missing. And food and agriculture is way too important to be missing a good data transparency and good science around it. And this is something what I'm very much looking forward to. Can humankind establish for its food and agriculture such a system?
I fully agree with what she said. And when you asked about a provocative question or a message to the audience, it's one of those I was thinking about, that really we need to reestablish that partnership, the trust between the policymakers, the scientists, and the citizens at large. We are seeing very bizarre trends where science that we don't want to hear is portrayed as fake news, is discredited, and that's not helping anybody. So when it comes to the facts about food, as she correctly said it, I think it's important that the citizens have the right to get the right information and not to be that science to be subjected to be spun by politicians depending on what agenda they have. And then I think once the citizens, particularly the youth, as he correctly said, have the information at their disposal, I think they will be able to drive the change that we want to see. But I really want to also urge that partnership of trust between the policy makers, the scientists, and the citizens. We need to do that.
Where does that start? Let's bring the house lights up so I can see everybody, and they can see you. All right, fantastic. Where does that trust start? How does that trust start?
Well, we saw, for example, as she was mentioning, when it started with the science of climate, we went through moments of denial, and we wasted a number of years because of that. Likewise, I think with the food systems, we also we should not make the same mistakes. When somebody says, this is bad for you, no, it's not true. Okay, of course, every one of us has the right to make the choices that we want. But I think we can only make the right choices when we can trust the information that is given to us. And then also admit that it's better to have a diversity of approaches. What works for Africa, rural Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is not necessarily what's going to work in Brazil or in Europe. But ultimately, if the end goal is to make sure that everybody has a right access to healthy, nutritious, adequate food, that is what we all care about.
And the information.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You have to be transparent. You have to understand how governments make decisions based on their information. We talk about the governments are doing wrong decision. Maybe they are not doing wrong decision because the way in which they get information is maybe wrong. So we should not completely blame governments that they are making a wrong decision, but we have to find out how do they get their information, how open, how transparent this information that we can question our own government. So it's a very important thing, which is basically rule of law and accountability would be the part of the decision-making mechanism if we don't do it. So we have to only sit and make a wrong decision. For instance, when we talk about the school feeding system, one of the most important things, how to understand and how to respond malnutrition. Who makes this decision about the school feeding? And when they make this decision, is there any other influence from the private sector that they should put to children's table this instead of that? So these are important issues.
Okay, so Lawrence, don't forget what you're about to say, because I need you to hold on to it for just a moment. I want to introduce you to 4 young ladies. Ladies, stand in the aisle so everyone can see you. When I call out your name, shout, "Good morning." Hello, Octavia. All right, very good. And Sophie. All right, very good. Ilalia, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, she's right there at the back. And Rosanna, hello. All right, stand in the aisles. Great, be right there. You have a question? We have Octavia and Sophie, Ilalia, Rosanna. People have been waving at me, wave at them. Ladies, make yourself very present. And when I come back to you, I want you to have somebody on the microphone. No pressure. All right. Lawrence, what were you going to say?
So 2 things. The IPCC, we've talked about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which brings all the scientists together to speak with one voice. I mean, I think that has been very important, and I think something like that could be very important in the food system, environment, health area. But it's about compiling evidence to make it, it's not about generating new evidence, it's about compiling it and actually making it impossible to ignore for policymakers. So I think it's more political than scientific, but nevertheless very important. How do you build trust? You build trust by working with people, by working together. So businesses, governments, civil society have to work together. But in the nutrition and health field, there's a deep distrust of business and the nutrition professionals, largely generated by infant feeding and breast milk substitute, the marketing of that, largely generated by sugar and added sugar. So we need to work together, and we need to talk to everybody. Talking to everybody is important. You want to work with a subset of people who you believe are doing the right things. But I disagree. I think governments are more culpable than many of you on the panel may think. I certainly think businesses need to do a lot more, but governments are in charge of setting the playing fields and the rules of the game. Businesses will always push it to the envelope and sometimes go beyond it, but governments need to be proactive, and that means not just taxing sugar, which is very important and I think will be very effective. It's happening in the UK next week. Sugar tax is coming in, but also subsidizing the good things in the diet. Again, fruits, vegetables, pulses, I'll keep going on about this stuff. There are export processing zones for countries that want to generate exports to generate foreign revenue. Why aren't there nutrition processing zones for companies that are producing foods that are healthy and nutritious, will be consumed domestically? Why don't they get tax breaks? Why don't they get cheaper water and electricity rates? I don't know. Public policy, fiscal policy can do a lot, and it's not activist enough.
All right, so the rules of engagement for the conversation. Please say your name, where you're from, and only speak if it's a question.
Of course. Thank you
Very
so much
good.
for the opportunity.
morning.
I'm Nikolai, European Public Health Alliance. And I must say, when I first saw the title of this year's FFA, I was just amazed of pleasure. It has health 3 times in its title. It's more than we could ever dream about. But then I started thinking, okay, healthy food. How can we make it more concrete in terms of agriculture and agriculture policy? And probably, as you will know, at the very moment we are revising our European big agricultural policy, which essentially is a financing mechanism. Now, I just wanted to ask you, if you imagine you have a big pot of money available, how would you spend it, essentially, or at least parts of it, to actually promote this healthy food component of today's title?
Thanks, Nikolai. Who wants to spend the money first? Siri.
Yeah. I like what he highlighted about the 3 healths in the title of this session. And therefore, if I had that money, indeed I would direct it to that health qualifier.
How much money do you need, Siri?
Oh, billions.
Just in case there's anyone in the room.
Yeah, well, he
pockets.
talked specifically about the EU, common agricultural policy. And I think, basically, again, going back to this universal agenda of the SDGs, which those of you who were in New York 2-3 years ago when it was being adopted, was seen as kind of a new pact for all of us, leaving no one behind. And in that no one behind, for me, it meant, of course, in terms of we, the human community, but also our environment as part of us. So if we're going to look at health, it's not just about the health of we the people, it's also the health of the environment without which we cannot be healthy in any case. So I would direct that pot of money to making sure that all those 3 dimensions, as we kept saying, the social, the economic, and the environmental, are indeed all healthy. It's easy to say, certainly very difficult to do, but we've got to start somewhere. But not sort of taking one, first I pick on this and then on this one. The 3 must go together. It's the only way to redress the mistakes that we've been doing in the past.
So I presume that the question's a difficult one because the money has to presumably benefit European farmers as well as farmers around the world. So that's not an easy one to figure out. I would spend it on technology development, but technology that is adoptable and adaptable for small and medium-sized farmers throughout Africa and Asia. So it would have to be relevant for farmers in Europe, but also relevant for other countries. And I would also spend it on a bit of business-to-business support, whether it's technical assistance or other kinds of support, because that's good for European farmers, but it's also good for African and Asian farmers. It gives the African and Asian farmers access to important technical assistance and expertise, but it also gives the European farmers, builds trust and builds their profile with governments in markets that they may want to supply in the future. But it's not an easy question to answer.
We actually have here a lot of common ground. I was thinking when I heard your question of farmers who apply conservation agriculture here in Europe. And when they do that, they see that farming gets much, much more complex because they don't grow 3 crops, they grow 6 crops or 8 crops. They help biodiversity with that. They help producing in Europe a larger variety of crops, hopefully then adding to a healthier diet. But they have to be able to manage this complexity on farm. They have to have digital tools, they have to have big data to make it also attractive and productive on farm, as much combining it with good biodiversity and a diverse food production. So I'm very much on the page, where are these technologies to support farmers? And then I think we have a sweet spot on it's good for the farmer, it's good for the environment, it's good for consumers, and in the end, it's good for business. And you don't need so vast amounts of money because there is a self-sustaining aspect from a business perspective. And I would look for these models, and they can be different country by country because agriculture is very different country by country.
Just a little adding on that, I'm not an expert on European agricultural policy, which is extremely important, is foundation of the European Union. So don't make me wrong that I'm an expert on that area. But when we talk about the subsidies, it's extremely a problematic area. Whenever I talk about the subsidies in the United States, farmers are going against me. No, 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 you shouldn't touch our subsidies. That's all our life. So, because I'm not a farmer, but the subsidy is also, as you said, not only for Europe, but you have to understand the global impact of the subsidies in other countries. So I think European Union should really revise carefully, but with everyone else on the table, not only farmers, but also peoples, consumers, and the government. That's the only way you can revise the European Union policy. Without the farmers, without the consumers, I don't think so it's a right decision to do.
So panel, I have a lot of people who want to talk to you. So I'm going to ask you to be very succinct. And the questions, I'm also going to ask you to be very succinct as well, so we can get as many in as possible. Thank you for standing for so long. Hello. Yes.
No problem. Hello?
Yes,
Yeah.
hello.
Okay, hello. My name is Professor Linson. I'm a neuroscientist. You may wonder what a neuroscientist is doing here, but in fact, the term neuroscience is obsolete. We should refer to the neuro-immuno-endocrino-epigenetic system. Okay, I have my question. Queen Noor mentioned the notion of inertial mindsets. Don't you think that the time is ripe to prepare the mindsets of citizens worldwide for a transition to new global governance, inviting coordinated, collective citizen-institution collaboration on an equal footing? We are faced with a global network of interconnected global challenges that can only be appropriately managed by first setting up a new global governance infrastructure. What do you think?
Halal.
Well,
Anything difficult just goes to halal.
Yeah, interesting question, of course, global governance. I don't think so at the time of our historical moment. Global governance is going really well, because if you look at many of the countries are developing internally, and the populism is getting very, very important in many elections of the Europe and the rest of the world. There's a clash of against globalization. So I think the global governance at this time of our world, it's a very problematic. I don't think so in the future will be better, hopefully better, but now we are more populist, more nationalist, more internal, if you look at the general situation of the world.
Yes, sir.
My name is Alexandru Marchiș, and I work for Catholic University of Milan. Now, the panel is talking about a crucial aspect, sustainability of food systems. Like this was not enough, I would like to bring another elephant in the room. With the university, we have been working in the past years successfully in developing research projects in bioeconomy. Now, some of these projects are solving the problems we have in terms of waste, managing waste and so on, valorizing waste in different ways and forms. But others will have to go in a kind of competition for the same resources, basically the land, the water, and so on. What is the opinion of the panel? What are the principles to reconcile these two trends? So basically, the necessity to develop a sustainable food system, and then the drive towards bioeconomy, so an industrial economy that is based on renewable resources. And what are the tasks of the different stakeholder groups in this process? Thank you.
I can have a go. I mean, it's a really, again, a very difficult question. I think, and I'm not going to give you a very specific answer, but I do think that we've gotten a bit complacent about these issues because we think that a move towards a more plant-based diet is good for health and it's good for greenhouse gas emissions. But it's not necessarily good for water use, energy use, and a valorization of waste. So I think it is a very difficult issue, and I think a lot of it is very context-specific, and here's an area where the science is really lagging, it seems to me, in terms of quantifying the trade-offs. So you've raised a very important issue, and I'm very sympathetic, but I don't have any specific answers for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Alan Buckwell, the Rise Foundation, Brussels. It touches on what Lawrence just mentioned. Do you agree that overconsumption of livestock products in many parts of the world is a high priority issue? If you do, what are the two actions that you would suggest that we can do to encourage change in consumption patterns?
I hate the questions that are directly related to me.
Lawrence.
This is really hard. It's a really hard issue, and I don't know the answer, is the question. You have to be very careful, though, about meat. Not all meat has the same greenhouse gas emission sets of issues. In many lower middle-income countries, we want people to eat more meat because that's a really important source of micronutrients. And there are lots of biological studies showing that the rate of growth of children is critically linked only to animal source foods. So this is a very difficult issue, but there are very clear guidelines from the World Health Organization about upper limits and lower limits. But how to get that to change, that's a $64 trillion question. This lobby is very, very powerful in the farming lobby and all through the food system. I don't know the answer. I'd love to hear some other answers from the panelists or the audience.
See, panel, you thought very carefully about this transitioning towards sustainable food systems for a healthy future. You thought very deeply about it. You came with some very clear ideas. If people walk out of this forum today, what is the one thing that you are suggesting that can be done immediately? The one thing. I have a feeling you're going to be recapping on what you've already said. So if you're going to recap, do it in a sentence. Hello.
Oh, to me? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
the one thing they can do walking out of here.
I thought I already said, but I'm repeating again. The human rights approach and democratization of the food system and changing our mindset from production to more human-oriented demand. So that would be, I think, my result of this for the future of the world, future of the planet, not only people.
What about Syngenta, Alexandra? What can Syngenta do?
So we can, every minute we go out, we can put on our boots and we can go on farmland and look at how can we improve the farms we have today, farming we have today. It's a lot what we can already do today. We don't need to wait for anybody, any policymakers. And let's collaborate, let's try to bring the different expertises together, and let's do things at a different scale than we are able to do that today.
I would say get out of our comfort zones. So there's two ways in which we could do that. One is if you see something, an injustice, something that's wrong, speak up about it. Talk to your parliamentarians, talk to your boss, talk to whoever you think can change it. So don't tolerate injustice within the food system, whether it's overconsumption or overuse of resources. And the second thing is talk to people you don't normally talk to. I was delighted to be invited here by the FFA, really delighted, because I love to talk about the issues I'm passionate about, but because I didn't know many people in the audience. This is a whole new audience for me. And each of us, we can't just keep talking to the same people we see in every different meeting. We've got to get out and form new partnerships and new alliances, because it's going to take everyone to solve this problem.
Yeah, my message would be, as though it may sound cliche, but there is more to the food than meets the eye. when you look at food, ask yourself many questions. It's not just about, okay, I'm going to buy this orange or this cereal. Think, where does it come from? How does it affect everything else around me? How does it affect other communities away, near and far from me? We've got to think as an interconnected world, which we have become. So there is more to food than meets the eye. Open your eyes and ask questions.
Do you do that every time you eat, Siri?
You want a diplomatic answer or a...
The candid, open dialogue answer would be what?
Not as often as I would like.
Right.
But I try to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We will have more questions later on during the day. I know you have many, which is why we have a break, because it's a networking break, so we can talk to each other. It doesn't always happen to have the stage and the audience. I want you to do one thing for me. Turn to the right, say good morning to the person on your right, and tell them the thing that you enjoyed the most this morning so far. If you have no one on your right, just talk to yourself.
I really like being on the panel with you today.
So I thought...
I have an idea.
Excellent. Turn to your left, say good morning to the person on your left. And now you have a friend for the break. All right? I will see you back here for the break. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel.